And we're back for our last presentation of the day. Rayanne, I will let you introduce our speakers now. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you for welcome back, everybody. We are in our last leg of the journey. I know it's been a long day, but very educational and informative for myself, and I know as Benedict was just saying. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Amanda Bitter, and I know she's here. So I'm just going to ask her to turn her camera on. There she is coming in. Oh, black. Oh, there we
got
are.
It. There we go.
There we are. And you can share your PowerPoint if you want. So while you do that, I'll just introduce you. So this is Detective Constable Amanda Bitter. She's a Major Crimes Bureau Intimate Partner Violence Officer at York Regional Police, and she has been in policing for 17 years. Prior to this role, she was also the Senior Safety Officer at York Regional Police. So she has also worked in mental health as well in on the mental health support team. So she's got a wealth of experience and knowledge around the issues of working with older adults in both perspectives of seniors, also in intimate partner violence work that she has been doing. I've worked with Amanda in the past, and so I'm hoping she can share a little bit more from the law enforcement perspective when we're thinking about the intersection of intimate partner violence in older adults, as well as when cognitive impairments may be in the situation that they get called for. So before I turn it over to Amanda, I do want to just give people another just information around warning, as Benedict talked about at the beginning of our session. So Amanda is going to present some real cases that they have been involved in where they have responded to calls where there has been older adults with cognitive impairments, just to get us a better understanding of the complexities that not only we as individual organizations and agencies deal with, but also what police deal with and how we need to work together collaboratively, which I think has been the message throughout this conference. And I'm seeing black squares on my screen. I'm not sure if anybody else is seeing that. But I just wanted to let people know that this presentation does include some content that might be emotionally challenging or triggering or upsetting for individuals, just to let people know that we will be talking about some cases. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda. And I don't know if I'm the only one seeing squares on my screen. Hopefully it's just
I'm seeing them as well, Rayanne. I'm seeing one right now on the right-hand side of the screen. So hopefully we can sort this out.
Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Amanda.
Are you guys seeing the PowerPoint though?
We are seeing the PowerPoints. They're just a few gray blocks that appeared when you were flipping through a couple of slides.
Okay, so I'm going to move it forward. Oh, wait, I can't. Hang on. I have my tech support. There we go. So go down. Okay, so I work in the Intimate Partner Violence Unit. We have one detective sergeant, one civilian liaison, two quality assurance review officers, and two teams with two detectives and 5 detective constables. We work Monday to Friday, 7 to 5 or 5 to 3 a.m. And we have 2 officers on call on the weekends. So these are just some of the offenses that we see in my unit. So you see there, homicide, that would actually go to the homicide unit. I'm going to go over a case later that we had homicide teed up because it was a really graphic assault and we thought the victim was going to pass away. She did not, so then it stayed within our unit. But physical, sexual assaults, criminal harassment, intimidation, uttering threats, forcible confinement, mischief, breaches of probation. I have a video here. Let's see if I can play it. This is just... like we're trying to see who the dominant aggressor is here. So in this case, it would be the orange cat. Okay, so dementia is a risk factor. If charged with a criminal offense, it will limit the availability for long-term care or retirement home. So once someone has that designation, oh, they've been charged with assault with a weapon, it increases the risk, and there's really difficulty in placing both the victim and accused, no matter You know what I mean? If the accused is charged, once they have that designation, it's difficult for the family to place them into long-term care. They're often held in the hospital or with an adult, like family member. So an untreated UTI can present like dementia. Patients with delirium are more likely to be aggressive because sometimes they're not med compliant. Police are not to determine not criminally responsible. That's what NCR means. So in the domestic realm, it's a you shall, right? We're mandated by the province if we have reasonable grounds to lay a charge. So where things get messy is exactly like some of the other presenters have mentioned. Oh, well, my mom has dementia, but that doesn't automatically make someone not capable. And sometimes capacity is fluid based on medication. If they're not formally deemed incapable, then we should be assuming people are capable, right?
Hi,
Now,
Amanda. Sorry, this
yes.
is the interpreter that's speaking. Your rate of speech is impossible for me to keep up right now. So if you could go back to the third bullet about the NCR and repeat
Okay.
yourself and slow down, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, sorry. So police were not to determine not criminally responsible. So it's up to the courts to deem someone not responsible for a criminal offense. We can't make that determination just because someone has a diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's, which isn't on its face value to deem you not capable of making decisions, whether that's to assault or what have you. So oftentimes we are laying charges. Now, I'll get into my few case studies that I've chosen to present here. There are ways around that, but that's with a Crown Consult. That's speaking with my detectives, my detective sergeants. So it's almost more work to not charge, even though in some circumstances it's the right thing to do. So again, if the partner has dementia, they're paranoid or they have paranoia, they're misplacing items. Our best practice is always a sworn statement. The reasons for that is come court time, maybe their capacity is declined, maybe they're no longer with us. So that's our best practice for sure. If hearing diagnoses, we're not to assume that they're capable or not capable, right, without that formal assessment. Oh, I'm going to go back. So I also had a case where someone's stating they're the power of attorney or the substitute decision maker. We also shouldn't be taking that at face value without the documentation to back it up. Because in the one case, she actually didn't have a formal power of attorney. It was just verbally discussed. So it's not quite the same thing. So barriers at the community level. Communities often face barriers to identify, respond to, and prevent abuse in later life. So ineffective response may result from lack of training for law enforcement. So on my end, there's the OPC Elder Abuse Investigative course. That's kind of the standard, like that's what everyone should be trying to take. Toronto used to have an Elder Abuse Investigative course. They're not offering it at the moment, to the best of my knowledge. And Durham Police Service has an Elder Abuse Investigative course that's tiered to both uniform and investigators. We at York Regional Police, we do not have something designated just for elder abuse. So lack of training for prosecutors, court officials, victim service providers, lack of coordination across systems and disciplines, and lack of funding to address elder abuse and to provide direct services. So at one point, the LEAP committee was trying to get provincial standards, which is what would be great, because then in order to be a designated elder abuse investigator, you would have to have some sort of courses to quantify that. And it's like the IPV unit that I'm part of. It was mandated by the province that police services across Ontario dedicate X amount of resources to develop a designated intimate partner violence unit. So we would love to see the same thing happen for elder abuse. I think it'll come. I just don't know when. So what might collaboration look like? Exchanging information on processes and disciplines, limitations to better understanding each other's roles and supporting older adults, exploring ways to enhance each other's work, working with the Crown. So we at York are lucky. We have something called the Mental Health Diversion Court. So that is for first offenders, someone with a cognitive impairment. We also liaise with family members, the social workers, and hospital staff. And I work a lot with the Crowns that work in conjunction with this mental health diversion court. It's sort of a workaround so that some of our accused aren't tied up in the judicial system. So far, my experience for some of the cases I'm going to go through, the charges have been stayed within like a month, which is not normal in the regular judicial system. So charged when they're on conditions to not return to the residence. So this is a big problem because if we arrest the accused and we have reasonable grounds to arrest them, and the accused is the caregiver for the victim, it's a whole whirlwind of placements and resource leaning for the family members. But that doesn't negate if there's, reasonable grounds to charge, then we're going to have to charge. So DV and the Mental Health Community Treatment Diversion Court. So I'm not sure who's all watching this, but this is really helpful for us in the realm of capacity issues and any mental health challenges. So intimate partner violence and mental health cases that are relatively low risk. So first offense, right? People have been married 30, 40 years. They have no history of intimate partner violence. And then for whatever reason, usually a cognitive impairment, they assault their partner, right? So then they would be referred to this community treatment diversion court. If they have mental health or addiction issues, elderly couple, no previous criminal involvement, and possible age-related cognitive decline, the Crown has an obligation of considering the prospect of conviction and public interest if the matter should proceed. So it's often up to the Crown if they're going to stay the charges, meaning withdraw. And then again, we're not to determine not criminally responsible. And what that means is we can't just assume, oh, they're not going to be charged or convicted because they have a diagnosis of dementia, right? So, okay, so here's my first case. So this came in as a weapons call. This happened at the hospital. So the charge nurse hears a woman yelling. So she runs to assist. And the male who was in the hospital bed had attacked his wife with a knife in the hospital. He was sedated and the female had to go to the triage. I'll show you pictures of the injuries. She had 3 stab wounds in her shoulder. She'd brought her husband of 37 years dinner and brought a steak knife from home. And he has no recollection of this event happening. She was shocked. The psychiatrist advised that they were treating the male for a UTI, and he'd been in hospital for 6 weeks. They were both in their 90s. So he was eating the food she brought him. He was reading the newspaper. He made mention of Trudeau's separation. He got up from bed, walked around, and then she realized he was stabbing her in the neck. It was the shoulder, but like high shoulder, you'll see. The nurses heard and rushed in and took the knife away from the accused. So he was in mid-swing, still trying to like stab her with the knife when the PSWs and nurses came in and stopped him. So when I hear of this case, my question is always, what if they didn't go in there and they had waited for police? And then what if police had got there? Yeah, so it's just considerations and thoughts. So whoever rushed in there, they're heroes for me for sure. So there was a trail of blood from the room to the hallway. The majority of it was mopped up. The knife that she brought from home was so that he could enjoy the meal. He stabbed her in the right shoulder 2 times. He was trying for the third. And she was cut on the left index finger. So we're always looking for like defensive wounds. So she had put her hand up and he had cut her in her hand. So here's some pictures. So here it is. It's just a steak knife. Here are, 2 puncture wounds. And here's a slice on her index finger. So he had no recollection of the assault once he had come out of the UTI. We think he had delirium. The concern charges were withdrawn and that he would come home. So the victim was scared if like he was discharged and went back to the home because she was now scared of him. And I understand. So they were trying to sell their home. And because they were on a no communication order, there had to be a variance in the bail so that the 2 lawyers could talk to one another to help facilitate the sales of the home. And the charges were ultimately withdrawn in this case. So the house was sold. He was incontinent, but still mentally capable. He is living in assisted living and she's living independently in an apartment. They do still communicate, but she has no plans to reconcile the relationship. She feels that the event was the result of a medical condition with no intention to harm her. So Here's another case that I had in 2023. Rita believed that she had hid her car keys. Her partner, Donald, advised that he did not take the keys. For the past few years, she's been misplacing items and blaming him. Both parties to uniform officers who attended showed signs of dementia and Alzheimer's. The police called their adult son to inquire as to any diagnoses, which is the right thing to do. In 2022, Rita reported someone stole her purse from the garage, but then she located her purse a few days later. Peter was advised to seek medical opinion for both parents. So nothing criminal here, it just shows a bit of the history of the cognitive decline. Then let's get to February of 24. Peter received a call from a neighbor and Donald knocked on their door and was bleeding. Peter was advised by Donald that Rita had jumped on his back and bit his hand, causing it to bleed. Peter advised that Rita was formally diagnosed with dementia this past December. So remember, she's just diagnosed. The social worker advised him that she has not been taking her medications. The social worker came into the home once a week. Donald has no cognitive issues, but he does have Parkinson's disease and is not very mobile. There was blood on Rita's shirt. She advised she had cut herself a few days prior. So police apprehended Rita under the Mental Health Act. So we can apprehend she was a harm to others, harm to herself by not taking the medication. And at the hospital, she could not recall why officers were there and forgot that they were ever at her home. So generally, we're not supposed to replace the Mental Health Act in lieu of laying a criminal charge. So he did bite her, or sorry, she did bite him. There was no pictures of his hand or her shirt with the blood on it. Donald refused to provide a statement. So a statement should have been maybe taken from the neighbor or by Peter, who would, like, if Donald told his son Rita jumped on his back and bit him, then we should have tried to speak with Peter. And then in that case, we would have probably pursued a charge. So in April of 2024, the family is in the process of getting a power of attorney in order to move Rita into a home with care. So this one's interesting because at the hospital, she wasn't capable when she went in, but after staying there for 6 weeks and taking her medication, she became capable. So like it was fluid and I guess med compliant. She refuses a power of attorney, which she's now capable of doing because they're deeming her capable. And she moves back home against her son Peter's wishes. Donald, who's been staying with Peter, when he heard that Rita was returning home, he wants to go home to take care of her. Because remember, Peter was loosely the caregiver for Rita. So they're back home. The first day they're home, with Donald, Rita slaps him. So Peter gets between them. She stopped taking her meds for 4 days. So I guess Rita had been home for 4 days and then Donald had come home. That first day she slapped him. So this time she's charged with assault and transported to the hospital due to the medication, her not taking it. She's deemed incapable and transitioned to memory care assisted living, and Donald returns home with supports. So here's another case that I had, February of 24. A support worker advises police that they received information from a client that her partner pushed her and a knife went into her arm. The couple were married for 23 years. The male, Alfred, was diagnosed 4 years ago with Alzheimer's disease. So the female partner, Nada, claims that she holds power of attorney. She didn't. We found out after when he was at the hospital for property and medical. Alfred's awaiting placement into long-term care. Alfred became angry that she was speaking with a male neighbor and pinched her arm. While cutting an orange, he poked her with the tip of the knife in her arm. She reported so that he would receive medical attention. She didn't want him arrested. So this is actually pretty common. People call the police because they want help for whatever. They want the accused to go to the hospital or whatever, and they don't realize that it's a mandatory charge if we have reasonable grounds. So he's arrested for assault with a weapon and assault and also apprehended under the Mental Health Act. That's okay. So to apprehend, but first we charge criminally if there's reasonable grounds. While reading the rights to counsel and caution, it seemed that Alfred did not understand. So they read him the youth rights to counsel. He was held due to not being able to understand his release conditions due to the Alzheimer's, and he can't return home due to the risk to Nada. So I spoke to the social worker at the hospital. There was no power of attorney in place. So they went by way of substitute decision maker. The adult daughter was concerned that Nada, so that was her stepmom, wasn't making decisions that were in her father's best interest. There was a Crown consult, and the charge was ultimately withdrawn through the mental health diversion court. So the hospital ethics department was looking to change the substitute decision maker because Nada wanted him home, but he needs long-term care. So this became a financial issue. So Nada didn't realize if he goes to long-term care, so does his old age security and his Ontario pension plan and all of the monies, right? So there's a financial strain. Then when they were threatening to change the substitute decision maker from Nada to the older adult daughter, then Nada agreed to have him go to long-term care. So here's Harrison, February of 25, a different case. Arnett calls the police and advised that her partner, Jack, of 40 years, called her from the hospital. Jack was arrested and charged with IPV offenses and was on a no communication order. Jack asked if Arnett was coming to pick him up, so he called from the hospital after being on the no communication order. So Arnett provided an audio statement and claims that she does not believe that Jack has any cognitive impairments. So then I spoke with the social worker at the hospital who advised that he was transferred to Whitby Shores. So he was initially in the hospital in Orillia and transferred to Whitby Shores for a geriatric assessment. So I wasn't comfortable of going to Whitby Shores to have Jack sign a medical release because I was concerned about his capacity. So then how would I, in good faith, have someone who I think has cognitive issues sign a medical release? So I was thinking of writing a production order for the phone records at the hospital. I spoke with the Crown and advised due to concerns regarding his capacity, she said it was okay to not charge. So if he had called her from the hospital and said something more than just come pick me up, say he had threatened her, then this whole situation might have been different. So I advised Arnett that we weren't going to charge because had some capacity concerns, and as did the Crown. So Arnett called a couple weeks later and advised that Jack's capacity had really declined. So remember, initially she says she doesn't think that he has any cognitive impairments. She then said he didn't even recognize their own son when he went to visit. So in this case, I think it was definitely the right call to not charge. And then this case isn't mine, but this is a really interesting one because the other cases, the charges were stayed because they were deemed not to have capacity from the Crown, or at least sorry.
Sorry, I was just going to say, if we can just avoid the video or audio, we don't need to play it.
Oh,
thanks.
Okay. So in the other cases, the charges were stayed because there was some question as to capacity of the accused. In this case, the charges were not stayed. This is a case of caregiver burnout. So the husband was suffering from caregiver burnout. He'd asked his children for 2 years for assistance in taking care of his elderly wife. He tried to kill her with a hammer. I have the 911 call here, but I won't play it. He says it twice. I've killed my wife. I've killed my wife. And then the dispatcher asked how, and he said with a hammer. And this was a case where we teed up homicide because we weren't sure if she was going to survive or not. If he did not call 911, she likely would not have survived. She probably would have bled out. So he was arrested and brought to the hospital. Investigators attended the hospital to interview the accused. So in this case, it was more about like education, right? For 2 years, he's asking for some supports and resources. Mom's care is just too much for him to handle. And yeah, I think he not only tried to kill her with a hammer, he also tried to take pills and end his own life. And even after being released from the hospital, he again tried to end his life by taking pills. And he received, I think it was a conditional discharge, but his charges were not stayed because just because someone's in their 90s, we don't want to be ageist. And, you know, he had come up with this idea to get himself out of having to care for her. So there was no capacity concerns in this regard for this gentleman. And that's it. So I guess questions are after the next presenter.
Yeah, or if anybody has any questions now.
There is a question.
Yeah,
right now.
Thanks.
We might as well take a breather and kind of deal with your presentation first. So someone is asking, when you say that you must lay a charge, if there are reasonable grounds, do you mean in situations of intimate partner violence specifically? And are there other situations that a charge is mandatory if there are reasonable grounds to believe a crime has occurred?
It's only in intimate partner violence circumstances. So only in that regard is it a you shall by the province.
Thanks. I was just wondering too, maybe you could speak to the collaboration that you, as an officer, work with your, the community partners like the Alzheimer's Society and any other home support services when you come across some of these situations, particularly around that court diversion program where you were talking about somebody comes in and just maybe a little bit more about how that process works or that model.
So it's not so much like the Alzheimer's Society, it's more the direct players. So the social workers at the hospital are really useful. I call them a lot. I would talk to a doctor if they would speak with us. The family, the power of attorney, like the adult children, the crowns. So I find sometimes we're following. If they went from this hospital to this hospital, you're talking to multiple social workers. Whoever sort of had a touch point with the person we want to generally speak with. And it's always great to get the history because in the one case where the man had made a phone call, we always do a previous history on our incidents of any accused party that comes into this unit. And I was uncertain if he would qualify for the mental health diversion program. I submitted it anyways, but he did have a history of intimate partner violence with his wife from like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So then the question becomes if he's abused her before knowingly, but now because he was transitioned to this cognitive, I guess, assessment in Whitby Shores, maybe his capacity has declined, but it's tricky when you have that history, right? Mm. So I did speak with the Crown about that. I wanted to be full and fair and frank, right?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key issues is, that collaboration and speaking and going over and above, like you talk about speaking to the family, speaking to the social worker and, bringing those, partners and people together to have that conversation. And, and I know in Ontario, and it's different a little bit in different provinces where we bring some of these high risk situations to either a hub or a situation table where we can discuss some of these high risk cases. So then they can maybe alleviate some of the justice system where we see, the first incident where we can make a referral and just maybe come to some plan that's put in place to help both the accused as well as the caregiver or spouse, whoever that party might be. And that does rely on everyone kind of collaborating and working together in a different framework, right? So bringing people maybe together just on a crisis moment, but also debriefing on after the fact. So thank you for sharing that. I know some of these cases are a little bit hard to hear, but they are also the reality and sort of what Margaret was talking about, that intersectionality and the complexities that we're trying to deal with. And we know that there's gaps in the system and trying to support all parties, and including the agencies that are working with them. So I appreciate you doing that. I think this, and I know Benedict's probably got something to ask, but it also leads into our next speaker, who's going to talk about interviewing older adult clients with dementia, because that's part of it as well, as not only from law enforcement, but also agencies, how we start that conversation to get out some of this information that what is the history and is it cognitive impairment or not? And you're as frontline officers, not the expert in diagnosing dementia, but we have to have a basic understanding of how we approach these kind of situations. Benedict, did you have something to add?
Yeah, we have another question which really gets to one of the core issues here, which is, does the charge have to happen immediately, or is there time for you in your role to figure out what's going on? And then does that person, if they have dementia or any cognitive impairment of some sort, do they go to jail? And then what happens then? Like, what supports are there for people living with dementia if they have to go to jail? Can you give us a bit of a sense of that? Right.
So I'll be honest, we're generally not equipped to jail. If someone needs PSW assistance, right? So in that instance, if they're arrested, they would be arrested, sure, but brought to hospital rather than to our facility. There is time. I mean, like the phone call one came into my queue. That's just a breach. There's time for that. So then in that circumstance, with the Crown Consult, we chose to not charge. But the one with the knife in the shoulder, the hammer, like, no, you're going to have to charge right away, right? Like it's a little bit situational, but you wouldn't not charge waiting to flush out if there's capacity concerns, if that answers the question.
Yes, I think it answers the question partially. I wonder, is this a conversation that is taking place within law enforcement? Because obviously our population is aging, numbers of dementias are rising as well. We know it's going to likely get more significant in years to come. Is this on the radar or something that needs to be addressed on how to either increase capacity or change approaches, or what we're going to do with these cases that might manifest more often?
I think Hamilton, Durham, Kingston have designated elder abuse investigative units. I think at York Regional Police, something might be starting to happen in that capacity. I'm not in the loop, but that's a big start, is you're going to have qualified investigators to be investigating these cases. And it's more than just intimate partner violence. It could be any offense, really. But the second piece to that, are we ever going to have trained PSWs that could come in and provide care in our jails? I don't know. I mean, but it is something they need to be thinking about. Otherwise, you're clogging up the hospitals, right?
Yeah, that's also the issue around, the emergency beds and placement of people being able to, stay in hospital. If they're not being discharged, then where do they go after that? As we we're talking about breaching, and there's like we talked about housing earlier, right? With the Alberta model, that, in Ontario, we don't have, similar shelter system like they have Unison is we don't have that here. And there are limited beds. So it is, people, maybe in hotels or motels, depending on, their situation, or, in some case, maybe end up homeless if they can't go back home because of conditions that they have to stay separate from the other person, from the other party, right? So, it is a complicated system, and it's something that, as Benedict mentioned at the beginning, this is the beginning of the starting of that conversation. And I've been privy to being able to participate in some of the other discussions here in Ontario and other jurisdictions to having these same conversations. So perhaps we'll have a part 2 of this conversation as we move forward. So thank you so much, Amanda, for sharing your information. Yep.
Oh, okay. So there's just one thing I didn't mention from an investigative standpoint. These investigations, unfortunately, it's not just the victim that needs to really be privy as to what's next in the Crown Consults. The family members are heavily leaned on, because maybe one sibling has mom and one sibling has dad, or what have you. So you almost have like a bunch of victims per se, right? Because the family members want to know what's happening, and they really want the charges stayed so that the right people can go to the right establishments. And I did have one victim where the elevator was out in one of our shelters and she needed a walker. So she did have to be transported to Toronto because the shelter just could not accommodate her needs here in York Region. So that's interesting that the shelters, if they have stairs, like, it may not work for some people.
Yeah. Yeah, the other barriers that we talked about also in previous housing, and we addressed that. So if there's no other questions, I appreciate you taking time. I know you're busy in your different shifts, so thank you so much, Amanda. And if anybody else has any questions, I think Amanda might be sticking around for at least to the end. So you can also post that into the Q&A boxes. Maybe as Joshua, our next speaker, is going to come online and talk about interviewing older adults. Good afternoon, Joshua. So Joshua Wyman is an assistant professor at King's University College at Western University. And he is a licensed school and clinical psychologist in Ontario. And he has been working with law enforcement officers in his research recently, which he's going to share with you. In the interviewing information in terms of older adults around criminal investigations. And he's also currently doing a older adult fraud victimization study as well. So I'll turn it over to you, Joshua. Thank you again for joining us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And I could see the cool background I have there. I didn't set it up, but all right. So of course, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So today I'm going to be really talking about the research that we've been doing, particularly here in Ontario, regarding the training needs of health professionals and but particularly law enforcement when it comes to providing support to older adults who are most at risk of abuse and neglect. And so I'm going to start by discussing our research on the training needs of these professionals, and then I'm going to transition to talking about the research on best practices for interviewing older adults, particularly those who have cognitive related challenges. So in terms of training needs, I've done 3 studies these past 4 years, where we looked at the training needs of different health professionals and law enforcement who have experience working with older adults. And so study 1 involved a pretty detailed interview that I did with 37 health professionals. These professionals included nurses, PSWs, physicians, dietitians, as well as social workers. And there was a range of experience among these professionals, from those who were new to their field to those who had been in the field for 32 years. And the average years of experience was 8.5 years. And the qualitative interview focused on many different topics, such as their observations of abuse and neglect towards older adults, risk factors, common perpetrators, as well as with regards to their training needs and their training background. And I'll primarily be talking about their training needs and reporting practices. So first I asked, how often that they've observed a form of older adult abuse or neglect in their work. And nearly 2/3 indicated that they've observed older adult abuse and neglect frequently and on at least a monthly basis, whereas 38% indicated that they've observed it on a weekly basis. And here's 2 notable quotes from participants. So one participant mentioned, sometimes 3 or 4 times a week when I'm on my shift, abuse of elderly, people who don't give them their medicine. So that's an example of like medical neglect. Whereas another participant indicated, probably at least maybe like every couple weeks or something like that. There constantly seems to be those issues coming up. So it is an issue that's commonly being observed in healthcare professions, and that's also consistent with research, other research in Canada and the United States as well. When asked about what are some barriers to reporting abuse and neglect that you may observe, the most commonly cited reporting barrier was fear of consequences. And so fear included the healthcare worker being fearful that they would be seen as a whistleblower, or that they may get in trouble by their coworkers or supervisors by reporting any abuse or neglect they've observed in the place they're working. Whereas some also mention that an older adult might be fearful or apprehensive themselves about reporting it due to fears of a loss of autonomy or trying to protect the perpetrator, as we see down here. Other things that came up was limited rapport with the victim, as well as insufficient reporting knowledge was indicated by 35% of participants, such as just not knowing when and where to report. And then institutional and professional barriers. These included, for institutional barriers, is having too high of a caseload and not having enough time to address every issue. And then professional barriers included not having enough training. And then cognitive challenges of the victim. And then societal barriers included just older adult maltreatment not being seen as a serious issue or being dealt with effectively within society. When asked about training needs, the common thing that was indicated by 49% was not having sufficient maltreatment knowledge. So this included wanting more training on being able to effectively identify and assess for older adult abuse and neglect, such as assistance being able to assess to determine if an older adult's being abused or neglected. 35% indicated they wanted more refresher trainings. Some indicated that they received training during their orientation on identifying abuse and neglect, and then they never received any follow-up training since then. 27% indicated more knowledge of referral resources. So what community resources are out there for supporting victims of abuse and neglect. And then 19% indicated wanting more interviewing training, more training on being able to ask someone about their experiences and whether or not they've experienced a form of abuse or neglect. So study 2 was a similar, but it focused on interviewing law enforcement professionals who have experience interviewing older adults. And the purpose of the interview was to gather information on their observations of older adult abuse and neglect in their communities, what interviewing practices they use, and what are their training experiences and recommendations. For time purposes, I'm mainly going to be talking about their training experiences and needs. And this included 19 law enforcement professionals, and there was a high overall level of experience. The average number of years in the profession was 20. And there was a high self-reported level of experience with an average of 7.8 out of 10. So when asked about what are some challenges that you experience when interviewing older adults, 88% indicated that they have, 88% indicated that they have challenges relating to health factors, such that the older adult may be having significant memory, language, hearing, or vision challenges that's negatively impacting the interview process. Emotional factors was indicated by 65% of participants, including things like feelings of despair, sadness, regret, or shame, which are common barriers to reporting. Sociocultural factors were indicated by 47%, such that there may be generational differences in how older adult abuse and neglect is perceived, such as wanting to keep it within the family because it's often a caregiver or a family member who's the common perpetrator, and not wanting to include outside community systems and services. And then finally, 24% indicated that the victim may just not be aware that they're being maltreated, and that would obviously be a major barrier to reporting. When asked about what are some areas that you would like further training, 53% indicated they wanted more disability-focused training, such as being able to better support older adults with dementia-related diseases, as well as those with hearing, vision, and mobility challenges. 53% indicated they wanted more multidisciplinary training, so being able to effectively collaborate with financial institutions, health institutions, and as well as community institutions in their investigations. 42% indicated they wanted improved interviewing practices, improved interviewing training, and improved interviewing guidelines. 32% indicated they wanted more frequent trainings on interviewing older adults. And then 21% indicated they want more training on older adult rights, so especially with regards to things like the power of attorney, legal wills, confidentiality rights, and credibility assessments. And so study 3 is a survey, and this study is ongoing. But so far we've collected 27 participants, and so I'm showing you some of the preliminary data. This survey is different from the previous study because instead of focusing on the general older adult population, this survey specifically inquires about interviewing practices and training experiences interviewing older adults with cognitive related challenges, particularly Alzheimer's disease. So it's focusing on older adults with Alzheimer's disease. And again, there's been 27 participants, and we ultimately hope to recruit between 80 and 100. So in terms of some of the preliminary findings, this was one of the key trends we're seeing early on. When asked how prepared they feel to interview older adults with cognitive impairments, 78% of participants indicated they were not comfortable, whereas only 22% indicated they were comfortable. When asked to rate their confidence from 0 to 10, 0 being like no confidence, 10 meaning extremely confident, we asked their level of confidence with older adults with no cognitive impairment, mild cognitive impairment, moderate cognitive impairment, and then severe cognitive impairment. And as you can see, there's a downward trend here. So there is high confidence, 9.2 out of 10 for interviewing older adults without a cognitive impairment, but then it decreases based on the level of severity, such that for older adults with a severe cognitive impairment, the level of confidence was 4.2 out of 10. And so it really shows there's a desire for improved training, particularly for those with more moderate to severe cognitive impairments. We further asked whether or not they've received different types of trainings for supporting different older adult populations and their mean confidence in their training preparedness. So here were some key findings here. So among interviewing older adults specifically, only 33% of the law enforcement professionals report receiving training on interviewing older adults. And then when you look at these other areas, so dementia-related disease, older adults with memory challenges, language challenges, hearing challenges, vision, mobility challenges, and mental health challenges, less than 30% receive training in these areas. And you can see the overall confidence is generally 5 out of 10 or lower. And it was a similar thing with older adults from Indigenous groups, where there was, again, low confidence in their level of preparedness. So you're seeing not many officers have received training regarding interviewing older adults with diverse needs, as well as, Indigenous groups as well, and they have a lower self-confidence in their preparedness. So the findings from these 3 studies essentially tell me that, health professionals are desiring for improved training on reporting practices and being able to effectively assess and identify and report cases of older adult abuse and neglect. Likewise, law enforcement professionals are expressing lower confidence in their training preparedness, particularly for interviewing older adults with lower cognitive functioning and those diagnosed with a form of dementia. So it's definitely an area that requires further training, further resources, and further support. And so now I'm just going to get into older adult victim and witness considerations when interviewing an older adult. So I'm going to be going over the research on interviewing older adults. And so first off, I always like to start out, most older adults can provide accurate, reliable, and detailed rich testimonies when best practices are utilized, like open-ended questions. So you should always start and try those first, okay? However, particularly after the age of 70, there is a decline in memory performance, okay? And you see this when it comes to free recall memory quantity, so the amount of information recalled, free recall memory accuracy, which is the accuracy of information recalled, lineup identification accuracy, that's when they view a lineup of potential suspect and the ability to identify the correct suspect. Suspect distance threshold, that is when the suspect is farther away, they have more difficulty identifying things like facial features. And misinformation effect, this is related to what's called suggestibility. And suggestibility is essentially when they're presented with inaccurate information or different information from someone else, like the interviewer, it's more likely to distort their memory. And then experts, including law enforcement, as well as memory experts, have indicated lower confidence in memory recall accuracy. Among older adults with a form of dementia, like Alzheimer's disease, memory performance further declines, okay? And this is based on research where they compared older adults with dementia compared to those older adults who were the same age, but they did not have a form of dementia. And what they saw is lower emotional and non-emotional word recognition, as well as lower free recall of autobiographical events. So lower ability to remember vocabulary that they learned, as well as lower ability to recall recent experiences that they had. And this table from a cool study by Neuwenhuis and colleagues really kind of shows the differences in memory recall. So this study, they had them learn long lists of emotional and non-emotional words, and they compared the control group, which was older adults without a cognitive impairment, older adults with a mild cognitive impairment, and then older adults with Alzheimer's disease. And in terms of total words recalled, you can see here, those without dementia without a cognitive impairment had 104 words recalled. Those with a mild cognitive impairment recalled 72 words, and those with Alzheimer's disease recalled 49.5 words. So you can see the decline. It's also worth noting that someone's capacity can fluctuate throughout the day. So among all people, all age groups, fatigue, stress, being in pain, being exposed to a trauma recently, as well as intoxication or substance use withdrawal, can all impact cognitive performance, okay? But among older adults with a dementia-related disease, they may also experience what's called sundowning. Okay, sundowning is when there is a increase in confusion and lower real cognitive performance, especially memory performance and reasoning later on in the day, particularly after dusk and throughout nighttime. Okay, so it's generally recommended to interview earlier in the day because often cognitive performance is higher. And then ageism. Ageism is when someone holds specific biases and negative attitudes and stereotypes towards older adults. And research has shown that this very much impacts the interviewing process. In terms of the impact on the interviewer, what they found is that interviewers who scored higher on measures of ageism were far less likely to ask open-ended questions and instead relied on very leading and suggestive close-ended questions. Whereas the interviewees, when they perceived the interviewers, having a negative perception of them and showing ageist indicators of ageism, they demonstrated more doubt in their memory and distrust towards their own memory performance. And memory doubt and distrust increases the risk of misinformation and suggestibility. So incorporating other information into your memory recall, even if you didn't recall it directly yourself. And in terms of the impact on jurors, so they've done studies where they had people play the role of a juror in a case, and they would read the case, and then they would also complete measures where they scored on their level of ageism. And essentially, those who scored higher on measures of ageism were more likely to have a negative attitude towards an older adult victim. And they were also less likely to convict a perpetrator if the older adult had a cognitive impairment. So simply in the studies, switching an older adult from having a cognitive impairment to having no cognitive impairment increased the likelihood they were going to convict someone. Whereas if the older adult had a cognitive impairment, they were less likely to convict the perpetrator. So you see how ageism impacts all aspects of investigations. In terms of best practices, myself and Dr. Lindsay Malloy, we published a paper last year where we went over all the literature to date on older adult police interviewing. Unfortunately, there hasn't been that much research or not enough research, especially when compared to younger adult and child populations. But here were some trends based on the literature. First, rapport building, building trust, having a positive attitude and a positive rapport with the older adult very much increases and improves the interviewing process. Cultural responsivity, having an appreciation of cultural values and understanding of different cultural norms, values, as well as differences in things like communication is also essential. Having a supportive and empathetic demeanor is very key. We often communicate nonverbally. And if an older adult is perceiving, or any eyewitness is perceiving that you are being confrontational or are expressing doubt in their towards their eyewitness report, they may be more likely to change their memory recollections because they're now doubting themselves. Free recall recollections are always encouraged. Open-ended questions. An open-ended question is, usually starts with, can you tell me more about, or tell me about the specific event. Open-ended follow-up prompts. These are where you try and build off the information they previously provided, such as, can you tell me more about this, based on what they said. WH questions, these are who, what, where, when, and how questions. These are also useful. They're more direct and you get more specific information, but they're not suggestive and leading because you're still encouraging them to use their own words to describe their experiences. And then close-ended questions, this is usually done at the end, and this is usually done to build off what they've already said or to clarify information. In terms of interview adaptations, especially for police officers, if an older adult is, having mobility challenges, transportation, or if they just prefer to be interviewed at home, that's a good idea. If you do interview them at home, wear plain clothes. Because they might be living in a residential area or in a long-term care home, and they don't want their neighbors to know they're being interviewed. So just wearing plain clothes, it's also more comforting and less intimidating. Technological aids can be very beneficial. Many of the newer hearing aids have Bluetooth enabled support, meaning that you might be able to connect your microphone directly to their hearing aid. And I know police officers at like the Durham Regional Police have utilized that in the work they do. And then voice amplifiers are just a microphone instead of raising your voice. When you raise your voice, even though you mean well, it can be perceived as intimidating. And so even just having a microphone can be very beneficial. Timing of the interview is very important. Usually the morning is most beneficial, but it's important to consult with the person first because they might be a night owl. And then follow-up communication and check-ins are very important. So even after the interview, doing check-ins, even if it's just for 5 minutes to see how they're doing, if they've been able to connect with some of the community resources you've recommended, can have a huge impact on the victim and really help them to feel supported going forward. In terms of interviewing older adults with cognitive impairments, plan for more time. Don't try and rush it, okay? There's a likelihood that there will be times where they might get off topic. They might need to be redirected. You might need to repeat information. And so you need to plan for more time. If you try and rush it, you likely won't get the information you need, and it might actually cause distress towards the witness. 2, consult with the caregivers, family members, or relevant health professionals, especially if they're in a long-term care home, to find what is the best time to interview them. What are some things that might provide comfort? What is their current, level of, language and memory capacity? Do not infantilize the person. This person is an adult, and they should be treated as an adult and with respect. Infantilizing is when you treat them much younger than they actually are, like a child. And that has shown to really decrease trust and create self-doubt. If possible, have a support person nearby in case the person requires assistance with medication, going to the washroom, or if they become highly distressed or confused. Acquiring consent is an ongoing process. Even if in the beginning they demonstrate a really good understanding of the ground rules and the interview process, that might change as the interview progresses. In some cases, officers report that the witness would forget who they were in the middle of the interview. So be very cognizant that it is an ongoing process and that you might need to pause the interview and resume another time. And then speak slowly and clearly. Keep your sentences short. Use their name to get attention. Okay. Avoid overly complex words, sayings, acronyms, and utilize your nonverbal behaviors and gestures like pointing to really accompany the verbal communication you're giving. Chunking information is helpful. Chunking is where you break complex information into smaller parts. So instead of listing off 5 instructions, you list off 1 and check understanding. 2, keep your questions short and focused. You can make them open-ended, but keep them more focused. If you ask a question like, tell me everything about why you want to talk to me today, that is a very broad question to ask. And so keeping it more focused to a specific timeline can really help to keep them on track. And avoid overly cognitively taxing questions. For police officers here in the audience, think about like the cognitive interview. Those questions are likely too cognitively taxing. The research shows they are too cognitively taxing, especially for older adults after the age of 75. Be prepared to repeat yourself and reintroduce yourself. And if the person becomes highly confused, don't try and reorient them to reality. Don't challenge their perspective. If they think they're in 1974, their world right now is in 1974. And so trying to reorient them, saying, no, it's 2025, might create distress, might increase confusion. And then interview practices to avoid. This is a great image from a new older adult interviewing guidelines that was published last year by Model Consulting Group in the United States. But it shows with the general older adult population, the practices that are most reliable. So narrative prompts, tell me about, open focused, who, what, where, when, and how. Then the least reliable are multiple choice questions and yes, no. And then other practices to avoid, leading and suggestive questions. These are questions where the question is worded in a way where you're implying an answer. A suggestive question could be, the nurse hit you, didn't they? You're implying an answer there. Multiple questions at once, such as, okay, what were they wearing? What color was their hair? How tall were they? These types of multiple questions can be very confusing. Okay. Overly broad questions, as I mentioned, having an unsupportive demeanor, such as when you express doubt, even things like if you can see me leaning back like this with arms crossed, looking to the side, okay, sighing, okay, these nonverbal behaviors may indicate that you don't believe them and you don't trust them. And then that creates self-doubt, which then decreases memory recall accuracy based on research. Confronting them or blaming them for what happened to them can also discourage reporting, and then just overly long interviews can be very exhausting. Doing an interview with someone, recalling information as a witness, you're engaged in a memory activity, okay? And it can be extremely tiring. And so maybe needing to break it up into multiple sessions that are close in duration in terms of like not being weeks apart might be preferred in some cases. And finally, I just wanted to finish by telling you about some helpful guidelines. In Ontario, the PEACE model is often used with the general adult population, but there's not yet specific information for older adults. The Achieving Best Evidence in Criminal Proceedings, this is used in the United Kingdom, and they do have on pages 40 to 44 information about interviewing vulnerable adults. But I wanted just you to be aware of these two new resources that have been developed, one by the government of Western Australia and the other one by Model Consulting Group in the United States, where they actually go over different important considerations and best practice interviewing guidelines for older adults. They have not been evaluated in a scientific context to determine their effectiveness, but I have read through them and they are quite helpful. So if you want these resources, please feel free to reach out. And just some key takeaways. Health and law enforcement professionals in Ontario have expressed a need for improved training and resources for supporting older adults most at risk for maltreatment. Like younger adults, older adults benefit from open-ended recall questions and follow-up prompts. However, overly long or overly complex questions are discouraged. And it's very important to plan in advance to determine what accommodations and supports are needed for the interview. And then there are some best practice interviewing guidelines available. They haven't been tested in a research context, but there is some helpful information regarding things like older adult risks for abuse and neglect, unique considerations for this population, as well as recommended interviewing practices. So that's it for me. Thank you so much for your time. And any questions?
Thank you so much, Joshua. That was fantastic. We're waiting for the questions to come in, but I guess I'll start with a very simple question. Are the resources that you pointed out to just now publicly available? Can we find them online? Because I'd like to share the links with the audience, as it might be useful to some of them.
Yes, they are publicly available. So what I can do is I can email you the links.
Yes,
and they're quite useful. The one by Model Consulting Group is quite long. It's like 200 pages, but they do give like a table of contents, and so there's some good valuable information there about interviewing. I will say, particularly this year, I am working with different professionals about developing interviewing guidelines for the Ontario context. And so that's kind of the big project I'm working on going forward in these next probably 12 months, is developing guidelines that are more relevant to the context of older adults living in Ontario.
That's fantastic. That was going to be one of my follow-up questions for you regarding, have you either been involved in or witnessed any recent advancements or in development of guidelines, because clearly there's a need and there's a want from the side of police forces to have access to better training. So is there stuff underway besides the work that you're currently doing?
Yes, so we're doing that, and I'm also running some other studies as well. One study, which is really the first of its kind, actually, is we've been able to get interviews from police officers involving older adults, including older adults in their 90s who have dementia. And we're actually watching the videos, reading the interview transcripts. We've had between 40 and 50 so far, which is amazing. And so we're actually evaluating the characteristics of the interviews and how the older adults are responding to the different police interviewing strategies. And so we're able to then, get a good understanding regarding how these interviews are progressing and which questions are more beneficial than others in terms of the amount of information recalled. So we're really excited about that. We're halfway done the coding, and yeah, it's been really cool.
That's amazing. And so in the current state of things, obviously it's, people who are in the police forces already deal with a lot. What can they do? Is there anything that you would recommend that are achievable goals? Like clearly a lot of the recommended practices are already a very good start, but is there or do you see, I guess, potential for organizations such as EAPO or CNPA and other groups to collaborate somehow to kind of ease the process of interviewing and of relating to people who end up in the law enforcement situation?
Yes. And so obviously, Elder Abuse Prevention Ontario is a phenomenal resource. I just need to, say that I've gone through it several times. And I think the collaboration is extremely key here. There are great organizations like LEAPS, where it's law enforcement professionals working together to enhance their understanding and practices for supporting older adults most at risk. And I think the key thing is access to more training and more collaboration opportunities. For example, if an interviewer has to interview an older adult who has a form of dementia, that they get paired up with someone who has a lot of experience in that field, because they might be surprised there are quite a few law enforcement professionals who have tremendous amount of experience in this field, and being able to then observe and learn from them first, because it is a unique skill. Yes, you want to employ the best practices, but being able to accommodate an older adult who has very unique needs does require more than, reading guidelines, which can be helpful. It requires also on-the-job training, supervising, shadowing, learning, and also just having things like the elder abuse course through the Ontario Police College, having that be more accessible. I help, I help with a session on that, and it is phenomenal. And just making that just accessible to more professionals. And then other things include elder specific units like at Durham Regional Police. That is so key going forward, especially because, the demographic of, age 65 and up is the fastest growing age demographic. And so this is going to be more and more part of the work they do. And so it's important to be able to have that training, as well as the on-the-job supervision, shadowing, and collaboration to be able to work most effectively.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for this. I see that we're going slightly over time, and I know our ASL interpreters are technically supposed to be done. I'm sure everybody is ready to be done today. That was a lot of information. So we'll wrap this up right now. Thank you so very much, everyone, for attending and for giving so generously of your time and your knowledge for these presentations today. I feel like those are extremely important conversations that need to be held. When we were researching the topic and looking for speakers and trying to build the program, we realized how it is still a very under-examined and under-addressed issue, especially when we're talking about, dementia within the context of GBV and elder abuse. So that is something that we know we are just starting. We are going to be exploring this more to have provide more holistic, coordinated, individualized supports for older victims, survivors, and their families. So we're looking forward to work more on this through other learning events, through other webinars. Please, if you have either questions or if you want to share resources, program updates, work that you're doing, research underway, like Joshua was just talking about, that are relevant to this topic or that you feel we should talk about, do let us know. Rayanne, I think you can put our slide on with our email and contact information. You can find us through social media. You can find us online. It's fairly easy to get a hold of us. Again, we will be sending you a link for a very short evaluation to hear from you about what you thought of the whole experience, the topic, how it might impact your work. And we want to thank again the funders for this event for victims and survivors of Crime Week, which is Justice Canada, who have helped us put this together today. So it was really a pleasure to have you all. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Don't be shy. Reach out if you have any questions or comments. Rianne, any last words?
No, thank you. Just reiterating those who stayed us with the whole 4 hours. Thank you for that. Just a reminder that it will take us a couple days to get everything uploaded to our websites. So just bear with us along with the links and anything that was shared. And we'll follow up with any questions or emails that we get. So thank you again. Thank you for Benedict for hosting as well this great event, and for the victims and survivors of Crime Week. So thank you all again.
Have a great rest of the day, everyone.